So I'm Tash. I'm one of Agencies North directors. Thank you very much for having me here today, Beck and Artur and Paul. So I thought I'd just chat for about 15 minutes to start with, just to give you some hopefully valuable tips and tricks about how to generate publicity for your next event. I've tried to take an approach firstly from the venue's perspective, and then a little bit from the producer's perspective, and then some general tips for both parties. So without further ado, so publicity for a show. How can you get the maximum publicity for an event that you're working on? So from the venue's perspective, preparation. Always good to start with a bit of planning. So this is the moment when you find out that you've booked an event, you've booked a show, you know what's coming to your venue, you know when it's coming. There's a couple of questions you should ask yourself to start with in terms of PR. Some events, for example, if you're working with a bigger major company like Queensland Ballet, for example, will have an in-house publicist. So does the event come with external third-party support in the way of PR, marketing or publicity that you can work with? Within this, have a think about what approvals you might need or what protocols. You know, if you're sending out a media release, do you need someone to have a look at that from the organisation? Also, have a think, if you are working with a third party, is there an opportunity to gain wider exposure about the show that's coming to your venue other than local audiences? So the next question to ask yourself is, what media material is available? What do you have to hand to be able to promote the event? Did the producer or the artist provide you with a media release or a media alert or some form of copy that you could use for a media release? Do you need to write a media release from scratch? Is the media release that they provided you with not quite right for your local audiences? Do you need to tweak it slightly? If you do tweak it or need to tailor it, you know, is there someone that you need to get approval from? Normally when an event copy has been written, it's been carefully crafted to really promote the messages of the show, what the show is about. So most of the time the producer or the marketing person that you're dealing with will want to see if you've changed it in any way, just to make sure it still gets across the same messages. And then once you've made your tweaks, you know, is there a final level of approval that you need to go through before you can distribute that to the media? So the next thing to look at is what content do you have available, particularly if you're trying to promote an event, you know, a few weeks in advance and you're not going to have access to any talent beforehand. You really need some beautiful high quality images to be able to provide to your media outlets. So again, whoever you're working with, the producer, the marketing person or the PR person, make sure you get a really nice selection of high quality images that will help tell the story of the event, what it's about. Maybe get some artist profile pictures as well, so get some really nice portrait shots of the cast who are going to be in the event. There might be some production images. If the tour is brand new or the event is brand new, you know, then make sure you get access to the marketing images. So it's not just images, think about footage as well. So that event might have toured around already. And you don't need the whole production footage. You just need sort of 1 to 2 minutes of really nice highlights of footage that will, you know, give people a flavour of what the event or show is going to be. And I say that particularly in mind for TV. So a lot of TV will actually take supplied footage. So it's always good to have that up your sleeve in case people can't take it along, but also for that advanced promotion, you know, before the event actually gets to your town. The next question is, what access to talent do you have? So really think about and work with, again, the producer to find out the answers to these questions. So what talent is going to be available in the lead up to the event for media opportunities? Is there one spokesperson that represents the event? Is it the artistic director of the company? Is it the lead cast member? Or is it somebody else? So work out who the best spokesperson is going to be, and then find out their availability and how you're going to be able to contact them in the lead up to the show, but also during the show. And then how do you get in touch with talent? Is there an artist manager that you need to go through? Is it through the stage manager? Is it through the artistic director? So just work all of those questions right from the beginning, so there's not any stickiness, you know, as things progress. And also when the cast and crew get to town, make sure you understand the production schedule from a publicity perspective, but I'll touch on that a bit later. Okay, so for the producers who are logged in, just a few specific tips from that side of the coin. Okay, so you know you're taking an event on tour. in terms of its publicity, have a really clear idea of what your objectives are from a publicity perspective for that show. Is it to get bums on seats? Is it a ticketed event? Is it a free event? Or is it a school show and you're looking to get wider exposure about the impact that the school show is having in the local community, statewide? Are you wanting to demonstrate the value that your event or your tour is providing to the local community, to other stakeholders, potentially funding stakeholders? So just have a really clear objective before you embark on publicity about what you want to achieve with the tour or event. And this is quite a big one, preparing your cast and crew for media. A lot of people aren't used to doing media, they're not, used to chatting with journalists, and it's really important before you put anyone in front of the media, or even if it's a phone interview, to make sure they feel really comfortable, they're really clear on what the journalist is going to be asking them. So at the beginning of this, you need to be really clear about what key messages you're trying to get across in a publicity perspective about your show or your event. Who is your key spokesperson? So if you've got a cast of 10, not all 10 people need to be prepared for the media. You might want to pick one or two. They might be in the lead roles that you want to brief after to make sure they're prepared. But also, if it's a show or event with some more broader topics potentially that the cast might feel comfortable talking about, it might be the artistic director or the producer of the show, or even the playwright who might want to get across why they've written the play in that particular manner. So once you've worked those things out, it's then preparing all those people who you're going to put up in front of the media for those media interviews. So how you do that, there's a bunch of different ways, and it really depends on, again, who you have access to and who you're working to. So you might have a marketing professional in your team who can give them a bit of training. The really basic one to do, actually, to make people feel really comfortable, is do a mock interview. So one of you pretends to be the journalist and one of you is the talent, and think about all the questions that a journalist might ask you, and actually just answering it, even though you've prepared and you've written notes, it actually helps to be in a really live mock situation of an interview, because the other person can then sort of identify, you didn't really get your point across there, or actually, no, we wouldn't say that about the show, we would describe it like this. So that's a really good tip that I would offer, and it doesn't matter who that person is doing the mock interview, it just sets up the reality of what an interview might be. There are also some simple tips for radio interviews and TV interviews that you could pass on to people, which I'm happy to share digitally actually with Beck afterwards, but a really simple one for radio, for example. If you're doing a phone interview, you're doing a pre-record or a live interview, but you're not sitting face-to-face with the presenter, it can be a little bit tricky because you might be in a bit of a booth and there's no one there and you can't see the people that you're talking to. But also with radio, people can't see you, so they really need to hear how you're feeling and what you're trying to express. So if anyone's doing a radio interview or even actually a phone interview for a print interview, smile down the phone. It's amazing how much your voice can change based on the facial expressions you've got. So even if someone's not looking at you, you can hear how they're feeling just by their expressions on their face. But I'm happy to send through some really basic radio and TV tips that you could pass on to your talent before they do an interview, just to give them a bit more confidence. The other spectrum, is to do media training. So we do media training, for various people, and that's when you've got a big festival coming up or a big campaign. It's really worthwhile. We actually do mock TV interviews, and you film the person doing the interview, and then you critique it afterwards. So there's many ways to prepare, but there are some basic things that you can do. And that mock interview, I would definitely do, because it really helps people visualise and feel like of what it's going to be to chat with a journalist. The other thing to do to prepare is know who you're talking to, what outlet are you chatting with, what's the journalist's background, what are they interested to hear about, that sort of thing. And then in terms of the final tip there is, from a producer's element, make sure you share that production schedule with the venue as soon as possible so that the venue could start preparing for on-the-ground media opportunities. So when are the talent going to be available when you guys roll into town? What possible media opportunities can you do when you get there that aren't going to interrupt the actual bumping in side of things, or them rehearsing, or them needing some rest time? Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next little section is just how do you find those media angles? How do you identify what is the story of your show or your tour? What's the hook basically that's going to get a journalist or a media outlet interested? So have a think about whether there is a local angle. So a couple of things to ask yourself. Is there a local connection of the event or the producer? Is one of the cast or the producer or the director originally from, the location? Do they have a personal connection to the location? Is it homegrown talent that's, left the location when they were 17 to pursue a career in ballet or theatre or whatever, and 20 years later they're coming back and they're performing in their hometown? Does the show address a local issue, something that's relevant to the local community? Is it going to resonate with them in a particular way? Is it political? Is there a debut of one of the cast members? So is this the first time that so-and-so is ever going to be performing as a professional actor, and it happens to be in your town? Another thing to think about is it the first time this particular arts company or this particular producer is going to be in your hometown in quite a long time? Is it the premiere of this company performing in your location? Or is it the first time they've been there in 10 years, 20 years? So, what's unique about the event coming to town? And then have a think about whether there's sort of a bit of a quirky or a bit of a different angle. So, are the costumes, were the costumes that had been designed for the show, have they got a really big story behind them? Have they been designed by, a really big fashion designer or someone from the local community? Or is there a story behind the set? Is there a story behind some of the set creation that's been done? Does it involve your local community? Does it involve someone high profile? Just think about all those elements that bring a show together, not just the cast and the crew, but also the behind the scenes aspect. People love hearing about how a show is put together, all of that backstage production element. So just have a think about the whole event, and are there any other angles that you can push out to the media apart from the cast and crew? Or is there a unique feature about the show? Like, is it happening in a pool? Is it happening outdoors? Is it happening in the first time you've opened an amphitheatre? Or is it happening in a cupboard? Just what else is a bit unique or a bit quirky that you can tell a story about? And again, this depends on objectives and whether this is something that you want to do. But even if a show is happening in a regional location, often it has a statewide or national angle to think about. If you're wanting to gain that wider exposure to the Queensland audience or a national audience. So just have a think about whether you think the show or the event, or the themes that the show are about, are of national or statewide significance. So some of the questions you could ask is, is this a world premiere? Is it a Queensland premiere? Is it a national premiere? Is the show coming to town in a special way? So Queensland Music Festival have their flying tours, so they roll into town on a plane. Is the cast touring, in a fire truck, in a special combi van? All of those sorts of things. Just have a bit of a wider think about if you wanted to get that profile, either from the producer element or from the venue perspective. Just have a think if there's a bigger story to tell other than attracting local audiences to the show. So a few tips about how you go about securing stories in the lead up to the event. So first and foremost, you're going to announce that the show or the event is coming to town. Best way to do this is to distribute a media release to your local media outlets. Make sure you send it out in advance to really let people know. But again, you guys know your local audience buying habits as well. So, in Brisbane, people book things in a little bit earlier, whereas I know in some, regional areas, people really do buy their tickets, last minute. So we would recommend 4 to 6 weeks out to send out that first media release, but also that depends on when you find out the show's coming, and often that can be last minute as well. So you all know your audience market the best, but that would be our recommendation. In terms of what that media release should include, so obviously details about the show, what's it about, what themes does it address, any information about the cast members that you need to give, are there any special guest artists, again, that local homegrown talent, if that's relevant, Who's the producer of the show, who's the director, who's the playwright, who's the production company. Things to think about including, is the show part of a wider Queensland tour that you need to mention, or an Australian tour. I would recommend having a quote in there from either the artistic director or the director, or even one of the lead cast. And then think about whether you need to include a quote from the venue about why you're excited that the show is coming to your venue. And again, thinking a bit more from a wider stakeholder perspective, is it pertinent to have a quote from your local MP or your local mayor about how excited they are that this particular show or this particular event is coming to your town. And obviously make sure you include things like dates and times and ticket prices, and obviously the most important, how they can actually book the tickets. Okay, so then you've sent the media release out, you've let people know the show's coming to town. And sorry, I meant to mention, when you do that, make sure you supply them with those high quality images. I don't know how many of you use Dropbox, but that's a really easy way to do it. So create a Dropbox folder, put in those high quality images that you have that promote the show. Make sure you name them in the way that media will be easily able to just grab them, pop them in. They know who's in the photo, they know who the photograph is taken by, so they can credit it accordingly, and they know, the context of the photo. This is the lead cast member, or this is a production image, taken earlier in the year of the show. And then same with any footage you could upload, and then that way journalists can just click on it and they've got everything that they need to do that first announcement story. So once that's done, think about what advanced interviews you can set up to run sort of, the 2 to 4 weeks, or 1 to 3 weeks before the event actually comes to town. So if you've got some local radio outlets, can you arrange for one of the cast members or the director to do a phone interview, pre-record or a live, in advance to really get people excited about the show coming to town. And, the journalists can ask them what the show's about, what audience can expect. And similarly with print and online, you can just arrange to set up a really simple phone interview so that people can get that pre-story. So the trick with getting that print online story is to ensure that you've got good images to be able to supply them with, because obviously they're not going to be able to get them because the cast aren't on the ground yet. So your next opportunity is then when the cast actually arrive in town. So this is where you work really closely with the producer, the stage manager, to ensure that you know the production schedule and you know exactly what those windows for media opportunities are. With things like if the cast are arriving by plane or by combi, that is a great photo op for the local paper. So-and-so arrives in town. And the purpose for these sorts of stories is twofold, really. It is to try and attract last-minute ticket sales or attendees, but it's also to tell the story of the show, the producers in town, and what they're doing while they're in town to celebrate the fact that they are in town. So in terms of print and online, think about whether you can set up any face-to-face interviews with a journalist and, again, cast member or director. Ideally, if the cast and crew are arriving into town the day before or 2 days before, you want to try and get that set up the day that they arrive. So hopefully the story will be published the day of the show to really help with those last minute ticket sales. That's the ideal scenario, but often, you do roll into town the morning of, which is fine. It's still good to have a story the next day for long-term sort of audience engagement. In terms of radio, again, is there a local studio that you can get some of the cast members along to, do an interview with one of the presenters? Would one of the radio journalists like to come along to the theatre and get some audio of rehearsals happening on stage, do a bit of behind-the-scenes story in the theatre that they could package up and either air the morning of or sometime during the day before the show? And again, in terms of TV, you really need to think about what visuals can you set up for them. So we're actually promoting Opera Queensland's Project Rossini tour at the moment, and something that we're encountering is the general rehearsal, so the opportunity for the local TV crews to get footage of the cast and the chorus members rehearsing on stage together is at 5 o'clock. And local TV journalists, they shut up shop at 5 o'clock. So we're exploring opportunities that we can set up for them during the day without obviously recreating an entire opera rehearsal, but we're getting sort of one cast member, one community chorus member, getting them to sing for the camera and then do some interviews. So just think about what opportunities you can create for TV that obviously aren't going to impact your rehearsal schedule, but are going to give them something good and visual to run. And ideally, again, depending on timings, you either want to set that up the day before if they're in town, or the night of. And then post-show stories, they're really important. So even though the ticket sales are done, again, it's the telling the story of the producer or the theatre company or whatever. They've been in town and they had a really great time. So one of the ways you can do this is through a review. Did you invite a journalist along? Did they review the event? Was there a social photographer? Can you take the social photography and supply the local paper with pictures the next day, just to sort of tell that audience story again? And again, it doesn't matter if you get that one chance at a print story and it runs the day after. It still tells the story of the cast and crew being in town. And then finally, just got a few tips about how to nurture those local media relationships. So, first and foremost, do you know who your local media are? It's important to try and have an up-to-date media contact list of exactly who the outlets are, who the journalists are, who the photographers are. And often, there'll be maybe one or two, depending on, how remote you are, but often there'll be, an outlet that will cover your area. So just knowing all the different outlets that will cover your particular area. But then in terms of that, just to add to that, in terms of those sort of key statewide, do you know the, potentially the Arts Editor, the Career Mail is, if you think, there's a bigger statewide story there. So just having a real look at, what media do you know, and, how can you build up those contacts? And also just thinking about the relationship that you have with the local media. Do you have a good meaningful relationship with them? So some of the ways you can do that is keep them informed. So keep them regularly up to date with what's happening at your venue. I'm sure you all do this already, but how do you do that? Is there a, at the beginning of the year or the latter year before, do you send out an announcement? This is what's on for next year, announcing your program of events. Do you give them a monthly update? Because obviously shows will come in throughout the year. Is there a media list that you pretty much send, this is what's coming on in the next few months? Do you make general venue announcements? So, if something's exciting is happening at your theatre or in your venue, you've got something new being built, tell them the story of your venue. Keep them involved with updates. Do you or your venue manager, actually catch up with a local journalist, like take them out for coffee or lunch, and sort of really build a relationship that way. And then it's just making sure you're giving them that regular access to interesting stories and talent, but also giving them access to a few behind-the-scenes things. Have they had a tour of your venue? Have they seen backstage? Journalists love to go backstage. They love to see the behind-the-scenes. Maybe give someone a behind-the-scenes wings experience if that's possible. Host a journalist backstage while the show's on. Really give them access and make them feel involved and wanting to tell the story of your venue. And then thinking about, those journalists attending the shows as well. So, you have a core sort of list of journalists that you invite to attend, but, also give them a complimentary ticket for their guests. People do like to go with a friend. And if there are any, pre or interval or functions happening, then, it's good to involve them in those as well. And that's all I have. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tash. That was really good and really informative. So now's the time we are going to have some questions from our participants. But while you guys are thinking up your questions, you can type them in the box there. I have a few questions for Tash. So one of my questions is, today there's a few people tuning in from local councils, and they might not necessarily be in charge of comms and media within their organisation. So they have to go through a communications team, and they may be working on several other projects within council. So have you got some tips for them to inspire those people within council to get the message out about their particular show or event?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that wider storytelling. It's what impact is the show going to have on the local community in a broader sense. So if you can help convince the comms team in council that this is a really good story, not just for the venue or the arts community, it's a really good story for the broader community and the impact it's going to have, then that will help you. Sometimes there won't be that element though. So, you know, probably need to be a little bit realistic about that, because they will have other they will have other communications that they need to make. But I think it's that digging at the beginning. What does this show really mean? What does it mean that it's coming to town? You know, what does it mean for the local community? Is there someone really high profile coming, you know, that's going to give a bit of a spotlight on the town? So really dig deep and work with the producer to figure out those opportunities. So if you know that the cast is going to arrive 2 days before, you know, is there a way that you can involve potentially the local council in a media opportunity? So that production schedule is really key. If you've got 2 days beforehand and you can run a media call where you can involve some local stakeholders, you know, potentially the artist coming into show, you can do something outside, a bit of a stunt, invite the local media along, make a bit of a splash, then they're going to be more potentially engaged, because it's sort of what's in it for them and the wider community.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
We've got some questions coming through here. So Elizabeth has asked, where do you get the mock questions for your interviews? Is there anywhere online or?
No, there's not sort of any one place. There are a few sort of basic questions that come up time and time again, and I guess it's just more from our experiencing and knowing what journalists are going to ask on the interview. But I would be happy to share some basic questions with Beck that she can circulate to if you like. Sometimes they're a little bit different depending on the outlet and depending on what story you've pitched. So say, for example, you've got a local homegrown talent coming back, it's going to be really focused on that. So it'll be, you know, when did you first start, you know, learning how to act? Where have you gone since then? What have you been doing? What is it like to be home? So there's, again, it does sort of depend a little bit, but I'd be happy to share a couple of examples if that was good. But it's really thinking about what would I want to know from a journalist perspective, and you take a guess. So obviously you don't know exactly what they're going to ask all of the time, but it's just having a bit of a feeling about what they're going to ask so you can at least prepare, and sometimes throwing in some tricky questions if you think there might be one, to try and prepare for any potentially tricky answers.
Do you, can you ask the media for some questions in advance?
You can. It's unlikely that they'll provide you with them. Some will. It really is a bit of a journalist by journalist case. You could. Always ask. I would say always ask, but maybe just don't expect that they always will. But if you sort of take it from the approach, you know, Mary hasn't done an interview before, she's a little nervous, would you mind sending through just a basic outline of what you'd like to ask her, just so she can make sure she feels 100% ready for the interview? That's absolutely fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
Luke has a question.
Okay.
Oh, no, Elizabeth's got another one on this topic, sorry. Can you ask them to ask questions you would have liked? So can you prep a journalist to ask certain questions that you would like them to ask? I think that's what she's asking.
Not really, but what you can do in your pitch to them, so that's thinking about the hook again. So say, for example, I'm pitching to the local radio, and you very much are pitching in this local homegrown talent. So it's like, oh, hi, you know, really exciting, you know, Joe Bloggs is coming back and performing for the first time in his hometown. You sort of feed them the information that you hope that they'll want to then put in their story. So in that sense, you are feeding them the information that you would like, because they then need to ask it to get that information in return. But in terms of sending them through an email saying, can you ask this, then no. Journalists like to, you know, come up with their own questions, or think they have. So it's all in that pitch, really, and providing them the information. So you can definitely give them bullet points, you know, like, oh, you know, these elements of this person's story are really interesting. That's sort of how you approach it. Or, oh, I think you'd be really interested in this because, you know, Joe's from here. He hasn't been back in 20 years. He's making his debut in his hometown. You know, then that will automatically come back into the story.
Cool. Thank you. And Luke now has a question he wants to know, to what extent do our media releases need to be print ready? Do we need to be able to write like a journo?
Yes, is the short answer to that one. So particularly actually with local outlets, that first announcement, they pretty much print the press release. So yes, in a nutshell, it's good if they're editorial style. So that first paragraph is where, what, how, when, who, all in the first paragraph. The quote from the artistic director or whoever the person is representing the show should probably come about the third or fourth paragraph down. And then all of that information about the details, like the dates of the performance, the ticket prices, should all sort of be down the bottom and aware when ticket prices in a very formatted way. If you can try and keep it to one page, that's good. But yeah, the more editorial it is, I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's just it will tell the story better to local audiences if it's not completely written in a marketing way. Because it gives that journalist impression, and because a lot of people do just hit print in local media because they have so many stories to tell and they're normally a one-man band in a lot of instances, then it's better for you if you've told it in a journalistic way, actually, because it does that storytelling from the journalist perspective that they don't have the time to do, unfortunately. So yeah, it is better if you can try and make it journalist ready. Thanks, Nick.
And Tash, would you suggest that you should keep your hook up your sleeve? So you issue the media release, which is just the sort of facts about the show, and then hope that they print that, and then keep your hook up your sleeve in the hope that you might get another story?
Yes, absolutely. Again, it depends on your approach. So that kind of key hook about why it's exciting that the show is coming to town should be in that initial release. But then, yeah, you might want to hold back a few things like the costumes, for example, or the set design. But we actually just call them pictures, a separate sort of pictures. So the media release should tell the majority of the story. But say, for example, if you're setting up like an exclusive access to a really high-profile talent, you wouldn't necessarily say that they were available or that someone was going to be announced down the track as a second push. It all depends on what information you've got up your sleeve. But that press release should still tell the story of why it's exciting that it's coming to town.
Cool,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And we have a very good question here from Jo. She's asking, if you don't have media contacts already and you're cold calling for the first time, do you have any tips for that scenario?
Tips for cold calling. Yes. The key is to get to the point really quite quickly. So, hello, my name is Tash. I'm calling from Maryborough Theatre. I've got an amazing show coming to town. I was just wondering if you had some time to talk about it. So just get to the point quite quickly of why you're calling, who you are, where you're from, and what you're calling about. Another tip I would give is if you send an email to a journo and then you call them, don't even mention the email in that call.
Well, that's a good tip.
That's a massively big pet hate of journalists, is if a PR or whoever calls and says, oh, hi, I sent you an email yesterday, just wondering if you got my email about the show. Don't even start with that. It's the same every time. Hi, it's Mary from... Mary? Was my name Joe before? My name's Tash from Maryborough Theatre. We've got an amazing show coming to town soon. Just wondering if you wanted an advance interview with this brilliant artist. Like, get it down in the space of 20 seconds. And even though regional media and Australian media are very friendly, imagine you're in London. So I worked in London for 5 years, and you've literally got 20 seconds to make a point. The journalist picks up as like news, and you've got to go really fast. So just put yourself in that scenario and what's going to keep them on the phone. It's not like that most of the time, but it's just... you've got a story. Let them know you've got a really good story for them. It's pretty much, you're not getting in touch to bother them. You're getting in touch to offer them a great story about a cool show coming to town, and they're going to potentially be able to interview this awesome artist. So it's what's in it for them, really.
Great. Yeah. We have a comment from Elizabeth that we didn't mention awareness of deadlines for media releases because they vary across some media outlets. Some outlets are daily, weekly or monthly.
Yeah.
Can you miss it completely if you're not in the right time frame?
Yes, you do need to know the deadlines of your local media. So Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. They do all vary. So if it's a monthly publication, they definitely work at least 6 weeks out. If it's a weekly publication, you should be okay for the week before. But a lot of print outlets in particular will have some form of entertainment or lifestyle, or like say for example the Townsville Bulletin has the Townsville Eye on the magazine on Saturday, so you want to target that, and that's going to be your big feature, and that's probably your opportunity for an interview with an artist, so you'd want to be wanting to target that 3 weeks out because it fills up. So you want to do a bit of a mini media plan basically when you first hear about the show, and factor in all of those, we call them long lead stories versus the week before and the what's on event listing. So you've got your features, which will be an interview with an artist, and you want to really focus on that first. And then your sort of what's on can happen a bit later. Radio, it's daily, unless it's a weekly show, but most of the time it's daily. So you really want to approach them sort of 3 days before, but you need to know before you approach them when the people are going to be free to talk to them. That's another tip. Don't pitch an artist unless you know you have access to that talent and you know their schedule in advance, because it'll save yourself a whole lot of toing and froing if the radio journalist says, oh, it's great, can we get him on the show tomorrow morning? And then you don't know the talent's available the next morning, and then they might not be free. And so just that's that knowing your access to talent in advance, which will help you formulate your media plan. So if you've got no access to the talent till they get on the ground, that's knocked out any potential pre-artist interviews, but you could still work with the journalist on another story. Perhaps they can chat with the director or something like that. So that's why that preparation is key at the beginning, those questions that I went through to figure all of that out, and then what you can go forth and offer the journo.
Tash, do you have any advice in pitching to commercial radio? Because often, I haven't done a lot of pitching in my time, but I often get the, if you buy advertising with us, we can do that story, and with some print media as well. Is there any advice around that, or is that just the nature of commercial media?
Well, look, we got a lot of coverage in commercial media and we don't advertise, so probably just trying to trip you up a lot of the time, actually. So a lot of commercial radio stations, like local commercial radio stations, will go for an interview. It's just making sure, again, that they know it's an exciting interview for their listeners. So sorry, I should have said that before. When you ring up and you're doing that cold call and say, oh, I think I've got a really great story for your listeners or for your readers, because that's their job, is to get good stories in their paper or good stories on their radio that's going to appeal to their listeners so they keep listening. So yes, there's the advertising, but ultimately they need good content to be able to attract listeners, readers, whatever. So that's what the commercials want to hear. It might be valuable to negotiate media partnerships with, particularly with local media outlets. I would definitely recommend exploring those opportunities. But there is a possibility to get coverage without advertising, particularly in local commercial radio. Actually, I don't think I've ever come up across that. Potentially in some local print outlets, yes, you will get more editorial coverage if you do a little bit of advertising, but you got to think about what it's worth and what other opportunities you could explore. But I wouldn't disregard it, but it's not your only way to get editorial coverage either at all.
I have another question. What advice have you got for people once they do get the story, say it's in print or online or on the radio? How can they capitalise on that by using other channels to get those stories out to more people?
Do you mean in regards to social media?
Yeah.
Yeah. So once you've got, particularly on radio, the beauty of ABC radio in particular is they always, most of the time, I shouldn't say always, most of the time, they do actually post the audio on their website. So it's fantastic to share that radio story through your social network. So if you've got a Facebook page or a Twitter account, then absolutely share that piece of radio, but also don't forget about your stakeholders as well. So coming back to that council factor, or was there a certain corporate partner who brought the show on board? So when you get a piece of coverage, definitely share it with your network. Celebrate it. Let them know that you spread the word about the show. In terms of print coverage, there's all sorts of lovely copyright issues with printing, taking photos of a print article. But say, for example, this is, this is the paper. Don't take a picture of the full article, but you could probably, take a sneaky pic of the masthead, so Townsville Bulletin or whatever. And if you've got Instagram or Facebook, if you do a cool sort of pic and you just say, make sure you pick up the Townsville Bulletin today and check out the story on page 3, you can share it that way. If you set up a TV op or a radio interview, so say you've got your talent in studio and they're doing the interview, take a picture and post it. Say so-and-so, is doing an interview with ABC, well, today, right now, tune in. But it's also sharing the fact that you set up in those interview opportunities. People love a picture of a camera doing an interview. Like, take a picture of the TV cameraman filming your artistic director and post that and say, we're going to be on Channel 7 tonight, make sure you tune in. So if you can tell people to tune in, that's a great message. If the story's already appeared, share the story and celebrate the story, not just with your audiences, but with those other key stakeholders, with your political, government, organisational stakeholders. And a big one, employees, share it with the people involved in the show, but also the people, if you're on tour, share it with the administration team back home. That's really important. Often, if people go on tour and the people left behind in the office, like, I wonder what's happening on tour. Share that, what's happening on tour and the fact that local media have been there and they're telling the story. It really keeps people engaged in the tour and its success.
Very good. Tash was taking a photo of us here in the studio earlier today, so she's taking her own advice.
If you're in a really remote location or a regional location and you think you've got a really big story to tell, people will come to your location if you can facilitate their journey a lot of the time. So if you think you've got that wider sort of statewide national story to tell, don't think that the only way you're going to be able to do it is through your local media on the ground. There might be creative ways that you could get a statewide, a Brisbane, a national journalist actually to you to tell that wider story. So, don't lock yourself off to just local media opportunities in that respect. If you're a really remote place, I've taken journalists to Arakoon, Mount Isa. There are ways to tell the story by getting people there, and often media partnerships in that respect can be quite helpful, but that might be a topic for a different day.
Very good.
Sorry.
You can't stop. So there's also a couple of resources on the Artour website around publicity and media, and as I said, we'll take all of Tash's great resources and add them to that kit. We would like to say one final thank you to the Flying Arts team, and thank you for hosting us again. We'll have another webinar coming through next month, and if you join the Artour e-news, you'll be up to date on what that is going to be. Thanks again, Tash.
Thank you very much for having me. Nice to speak with you all.
Bye.
Bye.